I was recently talking to a veteran foreign policy strategist in a quiet corner of a Washington cafe. And he spent the first, 20 minutes just complaining about the ghost town that the Africa Bureau had become.
Right. I've heard that. Empty desks, slashed budgets, the works.
Exactly. A general sense that, the continent had just fallen off the map for the White House. He seemed pretty resigned to it.
The whole America First doctrine. Places like Sudan are just outside the fence.
That was his take. But then his whole tone shifted. He leans in, pulls out this heavily marked up copy of the new national security strategy.
Oh, interesting.
And he just whispers, "Watch the pivot."
Yeah.
He points to this one specific clause, almost buried in the document.
What did it say?
A massive intelligence surge, authorized for the CIA specifically to track foreign influence in Sudan.
Wow. So the same administration that's cutting aid and leaving posts vacant is suddenly going all in on intel.
Suddenly, aggressively re-entering the fray. And it wasn't because of the rising death toll of the humanitarian crisis. I mean, those factors had been there for years, and they were largely ignored.
So it wasn't a humanitarian trigger?
Not at all. The spark was something much more tangible. He traced the map for me from the Red Sea to the mineral-rich interior. He pointed out how Russian and Chinese footprints were just getting too deep for Washington to ignore.
So it's the competition.
It's a striking contradiction, isn't it? A so-called peace president who talks about ending conflicts, now plunging his intelligence apparatus into one of the world's most complex war zones.
It leaves you with a really unsettling question.
Is this some newfound commitment to Sudanese stability? Or is it just a frantic scramble to secure the rare minerals of the future before the competition, locks the door?
That whole story, that sudden, almost purely transactional re-engagement, it perfectly frames what we're trying to do in this deep dive. We have to look beyond the headlines of, civil war and crisis to really understand the cold, calculated calculus behind this U.S. pivot.
So Sudan isn't just a crisis zone anymore, in their eyes.
Not primarily, no.
Yeah.
It's now seen through this purely geopolitical and economic lens. It represents a critical choke point for global supply chains, for resources, and for influence across the entire Horn of Africa.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that contradiction is huge. You ignore the human tragedy for years, but the second Russia and China show up to grab hard assets, Washington activates the CIA.
And that tension, that defines the new reality. We really need to examine Sudan through three critical lenses that help explain this transactional approach.
What are they?
First, there's the foundational economic driver. Let's call it industrial realism.
Industrial realism, okay.
It's the global scramble for physical assets, for rare minerals, all necessary for great power manufacturing dominance. Second, there's the strategic necessity of Red Sea institutional efficiency. The idea that securing these vital global arteries, it just outweighs any traditional diplomatic complexity. And third, there's this fundamental debate over state capacity versus immediate democratic reform.
Which pits Western ideals against what? Brutal regional pragmatism?
Exactly. Pragmatism for the sake of survival. And these three lenses, they're all intertwined. They explain why the world suddenly cares so profoundly about the internal mechanics and the external fate of the Sudanese state.
All right, let's start at the source of the chaos then, the internal engine. We always hear about the 2023 civil war between the Sudanese Armed Forces, the SAF, and the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, as some kind of political failure. But what I'm gathering is it's something far more fundamental. It's a violent struggle, a fight between military elites for control over the state's financial base.
That's absolutely correct. This isn't just a political spat, it's a fight over assets. The conflict is really the combination of a political economy that's been defined by fragmentation and predation for years.
So it's not two armies fighting for the country, it's something else.
It's a struggle for economic dominance between two heavily armed computing conglomerates that just happen to wear uniforms.
Conglomerates. That's a powerful way to put it.
Well, think about it. The RSF, its origins under al-Bashir, were rooted in this paramilitary power designed to check the regular army, the SAF. But both of them evolved into these autonomous economic actors.
So the war has basically transformed Sudan into what some are calling a shadow state.
It's an accurate description. A fragmented shadow state.
And a shadow state suggests that the formal government institutions, your ministries, treasuries, regulatory bodies, they're all just facades, right?
They're essentially facades. They hold no real power. The country is actually governed by this parallel predatory economic system.
And that system must just completely undermine Sudanese sovereignty.
Fundamentally, the formal institutions, they're still there, technically operational, but the real power and, more importantly, the real money flows completely bypass them.
Public resources like mineral revenues are just siphoned off.
Constantly redirected for the private gain of these military elites and their commanders. This system entrenches a kind of militia governance. It replaces any centralized formal authority with these fragmented power structures that primarily serve the interests of their external patrons.
The ones who facilitate their trade.
Precisely.
And what's the one resource that's fueling this entire system? It used to be oil, but that changed when South Sudan became independent.
Gold. Gold has decisively replaced oil as Sudan's main export. It is the absolute core driver of this conflict.
White gold.
It's easily extractable, easily concealable, and it's highly fungible on the international market.
And where are the key sources? Where is it all coming from?
The revenue is coming from artisanal mining sites. They're scattered across these critical, often remote regions. You've got Darfur, which has a long history of conflict, South Kordofan, and other sites along the Nile Valley. This illicit gold wealth is what allows both the SAF and the RSF to fund their war machines, completely independent of any legitimate central treasury.
So the gold is the fuel, the currency, and the strategic objective all at once.
All at once.
The scale of this illicit trade must just be staggering if it's funding a whole civil war. Where does it all go?
The vast majority is smuggled abroad, and the transnational networks that do it operate with this remarkable efficiency. They just bypass all customs, all central bank regulations.
Any idea of the volume?
Observers estimate it runs into the billions of dollars annually. It's a staggering amount of money.
Then how do they physically move it?
Usually by air. Sometimes it's disguised as, say, agricultural produce, or it's just carried by couriers. It'll often travel through neighboring countries before it reaches its final destination.
And we're very clear on where that final critical destination is.
Absolutely. The major financial hub that absorbs almost all of Sudan's official and illicit gold exports.
For both sides.
For both the SAF and the RSF is the United Arab Emirates.
The UAE.
The UAE serves as this critical external source of patronage and a transactional financial hub. It's indispensable to the continuation of the war economy.
So it's a sophisticated system.
Very. We are talking about a system of regulatory arbitrage, where this gold gets melted down, recertified, and then entered into global markets. It provides both warring factions with immediate hard currency liquidity.
So if you want to understand why this conflict keeps going,
you have to follow that gold trail straight to the Gulf.
And this foreign patronage, fueled by illicit gold, it isn't just supporting the war, it's fundamentally propping up this fragmented shadow state. It's allowing it to operate outside of any kind of international accountability.
That's the most critical implication, yes. The long-term forecast for Sudan, if this system persists, is, well, it's truly grim.
What's the end game?
Without a coordinated international regulatory intervention, and that means specifically targeting the transparency of that UAE gold trade, Sudan risks solidifying into a permanently fragmented state. The war economy, which relies entirely on these transnational smuggling networks, will continue to dictate the political future, not any institutional reforms or peace deals.
And this cycle brings us right back to that U.S. pivot we talked about at the beginning. When global powers look at Sudan, they're not seeing a political problem anymore, they are seeing a geologic prize.
Exactly.
This is where that concept of industrial realism comes into play. I've been reading analyses that suggest the strategic competition for rare minerals is driven purely by the need to secure physical supply chains.
To maintain national manufacturing dominance in a multipolar world. That's the very definition of the concept.
So industrial realism dictates that a state's engagement is all about securing hard assets.
Hard assets that are necessary for maintaining industrial and technological superiority. And Sudan doesn't just have gold. It has critical minerals like chromium, manganese, iron ore, and various elements that are vital for advanced technologies.
Like what?
Everything from batteries to high-strength alloys.
So if we look at this through the lens of, say, U.S.-China strategic competition, how do those specific minerals link directly to national manufacturing dominance?
Well, think about the sectors. Military technology, renewable energy infrastructure, advanced manufacturing in general.
Okay.
China, for instance, has a massive appetite for iron ore and manganese to feed its steel production. That underpins its entire infrastructure and industrial output.
And for the U.S. and its allies.
For them, securing stable sources of chromium and other rare earth elements is essential for supply chain resilience. They're terrified that relying on a single, potentially hostile source could be weaponized against them.
So when these geopolitical powers look at Sudan, what they're seeing is a strategic output zone.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Not a sovereign nation whose fate they're deciding, but just a source of raw materials they need to keep their own advanced economies, their factories oceans away from going dark.
Absolutely. The U.S. intelligence surge, the one authorized to track foreign influence, is fundamentally an exercise in resource protection.
So it's not about the Sudanese people.
It's about perceiving the expansion of Russian and Chinese footprints in these mineral-rich areas as a direct threat to their own long-term industrial resilience and supply chain control.
The stability of Sudan's political structure, then, is secondary.
It's a rhetorical goal, perhaps, but is absolutely secondary to ensuring the unimpeded flow of these materials out of the country and, crucially, denying rivals exclusive access. Industrial realism is just a cold, hard calculation based on extraction logistics and global factory output.
This internal fight for resources, then, connects immediately to Sudan's external global significance. If gold is the domestic fuel for the conflict,
then the Red Sea provides the global stage for the geopolitical competition that pulls in all those external players.
It really is the ultimate choke point.
It is. Sudan sits right on that Red Sea corridor, making it a crucial gateway for global trade, especially the transit of energy from the Gulf to Europe and all the high-volume traffic moving through the Suez Canal.
So Port Sudan, which is the current seat of the Saf-aligned administration, becomes this pivotal strategic hub.
It's a door that every major power wants to have their foot in.
Which is why we see Russia's push for a naval base there. It's the most explicit example of this external power projection. What are the specifics of that agreement?
It's an incredibly high-stakes deal. Sources confirmed it was finalized between Sudan and Russia in February 2025. It's a 25-year arrangement allowing Russia to establish a logistics and repair facility in Port Sudan.
Logistics and repair?
Yes, but here's the crucial part. The agreement permits Russia to station up to 4 naval vessels simultaneously. And critically, it includes provisions for nuclear-powered ships.
Nuclear-powered vessels, that is a massive strategic shift. That completely changes the balance of power in one of the world's most vital maritime arteries.
It does. It puts a major Russian naval footprint right on that critical transit route. It gives them force projection capabilities into the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean.
And it directly challenges U.S. and allied naval dominance in the region.
Absolutely. The U.S. recognized this immediately. Way back in 2022, before it was finalized, the U.S. ambassador explicitly warned that reviving this naval agreement would lead to Sudan's isolation.
And even after the deal was reportedly done in 2025, there was still geopolitical pushback that forced denials.
Exactly. The geopolitical sensitivity is so high that even after the announcement was made, Russia's deputy foreign minister denied that a concrete agreement had been finalized.
So that ambiguity just shows the intense pressure Khartoum is under.
Intense pressure from the U.S. and its regional allies like Egypt to backtrack or at least postpone it indefinitely. The Red Sea is just too vital to allow one great power to establish permanent nuclear-capable basing rights without massive blowback.
And it's not just Russia. We're seeing major regional powers, the Gulf states, also vying aggressively for maritime control.
And the internal competition is profound. The traditional regional logistics model, which was always centered on Djibouti,
where the U.S., China, and France all have bases.
Right. That model is being deliberately eroded. The UAE and Saudi Arabia have been channeling significant investments into Eritrean ports, specifically Assab and Massawa.
They're building alternatives.
By developing these alternative hubs, they're diminishing Djibouti's role and securing their own forward operational bases along that critical African coast. It's a deliberate attempt to diversify their own influence and reduce reliance on older, more U.S.-aligned port networks.
And how is Egypt, the big coastal power to the north, responding to all of this surge of external influence and militarization?
Egypt remains highly, almost fundamentally vigilant. Cairo views the Red Sea's security as an extension of its own national security, especially with the Suez Canal's importance.
So what's their official line?
The Egyptian foreign minister has stressed repeatedly that the security of the Red Sea should be the exclusive responsibility of the coastal nations.
Meaning Egypt, Sudan, Saudi Arabia, Eritrea?
Primarily, yes. And it's an implicit but very firm rejection of the involvement of non-coastal actors like Russia or Turkey in setting any security arrangements. Egypt is determined to preserve this strategic balance.
We also saw previous attempts at investment, like from Turkey and Qatar, to develop older ports like Suakin. What happened to those?
Those are crucial examples of how political instability can just immediately shutter strategic infrastructure deals. Turkey and Qatar had made efforts to develop the ancient Ottoman port of Suakin. Qatar even signed a $4 billion deal back in 2018.
But then the 2019 revolution happened.
And following that, and all the subsequent political instability, those agreements were suspended, or they just remain unimplemented. It shows that instability in Sudan has direct, measurable costs to regional ambitions.
If the Red Sea is such a vital global artery, then the focus has to shift from traditional interventionism to just pure results, keeping the artery open. And this brings us to that perspective of institutional efficiency and result-oriented diplomacy. It sounds like a move away from the idealism of the past toward a more survivalist view of global affairs.
That survivalist view is rooted in what some analysts call the era of decadent globalization.
Decadent globalization.
The core idea is that the global West, or the collective international system, it just can't afford the complexity, the expense, or the time required for these prolonged idealist diplomatic interventions anymore. The kind aimed at comprehensive democratic reform.
So the focus shifts.
Entirely to result-oriented diplomacy.
And what does that mean in practical terms for a place like Sudan?
It means the goal is collective survival. And that's achieved by prioritizing the efficiency and the security of that vital Red Sea artery. That has to outweigh the traditional Western liberal interventionist frameworks.
It's a pragmatic attitude.
Very. If transactional deals, even with unsavory actors, can ensure the trade lanes are secure and maritime security is maintained, then those deals get prioritized. The security of the water is more important than the democracy on the land.
So stability is achieved by simple transactional efficacy, not complex diplomatic maneuvering. It sounds cynical, but maybe it's necessary if the alternative is a complete breakdown of global trade.
It's exactly that. When supply chains are this stressed globally, and when the threat of piracy or state-sponsored disruption is always looming, the priority becomes hardening the institutions that manage the flow of goods. This transactional mindset is a direct consequence of that industrial realism we talked about.
Right.
You need the assets flowing, so you need the lanes protected by any means necessary. And the transactional interests of industrial realism and this need for institutional efficiency, they directly clash with the stated ideals of foreign policy. It creates this fundamental tension to how everyone approaches Sudan.
The struggle between prioritizing stability and demanding immediate democratic reform. Let's start with the idealist framework then. The one the U.S. officially promotes, even while it's pursuing this very pragmatic pivot. The U.S. line is that stability is impossible without immediate civilian empowerment.
That is the rhetorical framework, yes. Washington views civilian authority as an immediate prerequisite for peace. They argue that military rule is inherently unsustainable, that it just leads to recurring conflict.
So the official policy is to push for a rapid transition to civilian rule.
A rapid transitional process, yes, arguing that it's the only path to long-term legitimacy and peace.
But the big critique of this approach is that the administration seems to lack a clear operational vision for actually ending the war.
That's the critical observation from many policy analysts.
They seem more focused on managing the crisis than resolving the underlying struggle.
Right. Despite all the democratic rhetoric, they lack a concrete, actionable plan for achieving a rapid democratic transition in such a deeply fragmented and militarized state. So the focus becomes pragmatic.
It becomes about managing the conflict to protect their own strategic interests.
Countering Russian and Chinese influence, securing access to rare minerals, ensuring the Red Sea stays stable. The broader idealist goals of a quick democratic transition are, in practice, subordinated to this cold security and resource calculus.
Okay, so now let's look at the dramatically different approach from the key regional powers. Primarily Egypt and Saudi Arabia, who prioritize stability above everything else. What's their logic?
Their position is really rooted in regional trauma and a deep fear of state collapse. These actors broadly emphasize safeguarding existing state institutions, which, in the Sudanese context, inherently means reinforcing the military.
They prioritize territorial unity and immediate security consolidation.
And for them, civilian governance is subordinated to that prior condition of just having order. They argue that fragmentation and instability, which could lead to transnational militant groups or massive refugee flows.
That poses a far greater and more immediate threat than postponing democratic reforms.
Exactly. And for Egypt, this isn't just theory, It's a long-standing strategic doctrine regarding its southern neighbor.
Right. Egypt acts as this crucial external pillar, consistently reinforcing this act's legitimacy.
It's consistent with a long historical tradition of strategic interference in Sudanese politics. Cairo has consistently privileged order, hierarchy, and institutional control over the uncertainty of democracy.
And this support isn't just rhetorical.
Not at all. Reports suggest Cairo has provided tangible military and technical support to the SF in their war against the RSF. They view the SF as the only viable mechanism for preventing total state collapse and ensuring the integrity of Sudan's northern border.
This really highlights the core tension of the state capacity argument, the idea that strength is a necessary precursor for any stable future. I've heard this viewpoint called the peace through strength doctrine.
Yes, in a highly pragmatic sense.
Yeah.
It argues forcefully for state capacity over procedural reform.
What's the underlying belief?
The belief is that institutional function and basic survival require a baseline level of strength. As, a former port administrator might put it, you can't vote in the dark and you can't build a parliament on a broken road.
The infrastructure and security have to be viable first.
The state must first provide the quiet, the security baseline that's necessary for citizens to survive and institutions to even attempt to function before democracy can ever take root.
So you have the U.S. pushing democratic ideals, but effectively managing a war that's being prolonged by its regional allies who are pursuing stability. This leads to a clear and damaging split in support among the external actors.
It's a huge split. You have a clear strategic alignment. Egypt and Saudi Arabia prioritize institutional continuity, so they support the Sudanese armed forces, the SF.
But then you have the UAE.
And then you have the United Arab Emirates, which has been widely reported as being sympathetic to and even supplying logistical support to the rival Rapid Support Forces, the RSF.
That conflicting axis means that every external actor, while nominally pushing for peace, is simultaneously empowering one side of the conflict to advance its own distinct transactional interests.
Whether it's stability for Cairo or economic access for Abu Dhabi.
It creates this perfectly encoded geopolitical theater.
It does. And the peace frameworks become almost meaningless because the external strategic priorities diverge so dramatically in practice. This conflict is sustained by this external support structure, which makes a purely internal resolution seem increasingly unlikely.
Not without some kind of unified, coherent regional framework that can shut off the financial and logistical pipelines.
Which is the biggest challenge of all.
And that need for a unified framework leads us to the state of the regional bodies that should, in theory, be leading the charge for peace. But it seems the institutional architecture in the Horn of Africa is severely marginalized.
That is an understatement. The regional security bodies, which should be the first line of defense against instability, they're struggling for relevance. Security cooperation in the region has historically been really difficult. It's always relied on ad hoc coalitions rather than integrated structures.
And the African Union, the AU?
The AU, the main continental body, has been marginalized and largely bypassed. It's playing a marginal, if not non-existent, role in the Sudan conflict.
What about IGA, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development? Geographically, they're positioned to lead.
But they're facing a crisis of capacity. IGAD has these significant fundamental challenges that prevent it from being an effective peace broker or security coordinator.
Like what?
Well, first, there are profound jurisdictional issues. IGAD's mandate overlaps confusingly with other frameworks like the East African Community and the Nile Basin Initiative.
So it dilutes their authority.
And it allows member states to forum shop for whatever diplomatic venue is most favorable to them. And second, and this is critical, they just lack the financial capacity to own, sustain, and run security interventions effectively. They're heavily reliant on external funding, which leads to stagnation when donor interests shift.
And politically, they're being undermined from within.
Absolutely. There's profound political resistance, notably from states like Eritrea, which are seen as actively exacerbating regional instability through their own cross-border interventions and external alignments.
So that lack of unity just debilitates the whole effort.
Completely. It allows external conflicts to spiral out of control.
And when regional institutions are that weak, it creates an enormous security vacuum. You described the region earlier as an easy playground. What makes it so susceptible to external influence?
A crowded region is another apt term. It's an easy playground for multiple external and emerging powers with often contradictory interests. You've got the Gulf states, the US, China, Russia, Turkey, all operating simultaneously.
And they just exploit the internal vulnerability.
They exploit the poverty, the weak state structures, the militias. They offer these transactional, short-term deals that undermine the collective stability of the region in favor of their own rapid, self-interested resource access or geopolitical positioning.
And this vulnerability is also linked to the declining commitment from traditional Western partners, isn't it?
It is. The security gap is profoundly worsened by the declining financial and logistic assistance from Western partners who previously supported African security infrastructure, training, and peacekeeping.
So the global priorities have shifted.
The shift away from, post 9/11 counterterrorism funding or general peacekeeping has left a massive financial and security void. And emerging powers step in to fill that void with transactional deals, not institutional support. It just makes the region more and more susceptible to these contradictory external agendas.
Given this deeply fragile architecture, what concrete steps do regional experts suggest for achieving what you call collective survival? How do they move toward a more resilient security framework?
The primary consensus is that the region needs innovative strategies that fundamentally transcend the traditional state-centric frameworks. They have to harness the collective wisdom of not just governments, but also non-state actors and communities. But there are several specific immediate steps that are crucial to building any kind of institutional credibility.
Financial independence has to be at the top of the list, I imagine.
It's non-negotiable. There's an urgent need to strengthen regional leadership and achieve genuine financial independence to reduce that heavy reliance on external actors. Regional bodies have to build their own internal financial capacity and introduce binding enforcement mechanisms that actually hold member states accountable.
Preventing them from undermining regional initiatives for their own national gain.
Exactly.
And how do they generate the political will needed for that cohesion? That seems like the hardest part.
It is the hardest challenge. The states must generate political will and unity of purpose. This is essential to allow an organization like IGAD to perform its functions and devise common, unified positions, especially on something as contested as the security of the Red Sea.
So they have to agree to coordinate and support their own regional bodies rather than bypassing them.
Instead of bypassing them for bilateral, often self-defeating deals with external powers, yes.
And finally, we can't ignore the ongoing specific interstate differences that are always threatening to destabilize the Horn of Africa. I'm thinking of water and maritime access.
That friction has to be addressed through established institutional and legal frameworks. You have to turn these zero-sum conflicts into negotiated processes.
What does that look like?
It means transparent dialogue over highly sensitive issues, like Ethiopia's quest for sea access, specifically the Ethiopia-Somaliland MOU, and the severe tensions this creates with countries like Egypt. And it means implementing existing legal frameworks, like the Cooperative Framework Agreement of the Nile Basin. That could form a foundation for collective action among all the riparian countries to protect mutual security interests.
Assuming all the relevant states, like Sudan and Egypt, are willing to engage honestly with those common frameworks.
That's the major assumption. Until these underlying tensions are managed institutionally, the region just remains a tinderbox, perpetually vulnerable to internal conflict and external exploitation. So if we synthesize everything we've analyzed today, the central tension is, well, it's stark. Sudan's tragedy is no longer a peripheral humanitarian issue in Washington or among rival global powers.
Right.
It has become a core battleground for the future of global supply chains, industrial dominance, and strategic maritime access.
That U.S. pivot we started with, defined by a surge in intelligence rather than aid.
It demonstrates that humanitarian concerns can be and are ignored for years until they intersect with the transactional necessities of industrial and geopolitical competition.
The lesson here is brutal. The world paid very little attention when the fighting was contained, but when the gold stops flowing and the Red Sea corridor becomes militarized, the global calculus shifts entirely.
The calculus shifts entirely. We transition from a moral framework to a purely operational one.
When global stability is threatened, the world stops looking for moral clarity and starts valuing efficiency, capacity, and hard assets above all else. And this forces countries in the region to make pragmatic, often deeply cynical, choices just to ensure collective survival, trading the promise of democratic transformation for the brutal necessity of order and security along their vital shores.